Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. Today we have the middle child when it comes to the Legendary Weapon tier list series, the final one for Destiny, and that's going to be Specials. Specials are arguably a lot more interesting than primaries. If you're curious though, when it comes to methodology, how I make the tier list, as well as maybe my opinions on champion intrinsic, stuff like that, I would go and watch the intro of the primary video because I don't want to just rehash all the same points that I was going over in the intro to that video. When it comes to specials, same thing here. I'm going to have some weapons bolded that I think are notable that I might talk about in this video. But after the video is over, I'm going to unbold these. So if you go to the spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description, and you see that there's no bolded weapons anymore, that's why. I just don't want people to be confused when they look at the spreadsheet and be like, why are some of these weapons bolded, right? I just don't want to confuse people. So that's pretty much it for specials. And I'm going to be covering 7 families of specials today. Breach grenade launchers, fusions, glaives, shotguns, snipers. Rocket sidearms are big enough now that they kind of have their own tab. We have traces, and then finally an other section. The other section, we're going to be covering rocket pulses as well as uncivil discourse. Not many of those, obviously, so not much of a tier list. But I will still be discussing, what I think are the best roles, as well as whether I think you should farm for them in general. And one more thing before we get started, I do want to make a little quick correction. If you look at the pinned comment in the archetype tier list video, I had to make some corrections to some of the archetype rankings there. For example, high impact scout, I said it was like the best scout archetype in the game. There was a testing error there where I tested with a kinetic high impact scout, and I forgot to remove the impact of the kinetic damage bonus to non-boss combatants for primary weapons, which is 10%. So if you're curious, I've updated the archetype tier list to reflect some of the new rankings, and I listed in the pinned comment on that video every change that needs to be made. Now, thankfully, if you actually look at the primary tier list, not much has changed because a lot of the best archetypes, a lot of the best weapons were already at the top of the tier list. So the stuff in the top of the S tier didn't really change, but there were a couple other changes that I made to account for this kinetic damage bonus that I forgot to account for. So sorry about that. It shouldn't really change my recommendations. I mean, what I say in the primary video is for the most part the exact same. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. And then let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be starting with the Breach GL family, which is arguably the most diverse when it comes to use case. Area denials, micro missiles, double fires, lightweights, they all kind of do different things. I guess double fires and lightweights are pretty similar, but they all kind of have different purposes. And we're going to discuss what I think is the best for each of these purposes. So first we have generic ad clear, VS velocity baton, repulsor destabilizing. I don't need to kind of repeat myself from the primary video, but this is season of the good void weapons, and I say seasoned lightly here, but this is season of the good void weapons. Rare Legacy is absolutely excellent with any weapon with this level of tick rate. And then you also have some other perks like Envious Arsenal, which I believe can be paired with some damage perks on Baton as well. It has get some damage perks in the second column. You have Chain Reaction, you have Unrelenting for some extra healing if you can get Void Overshield for the artifact, for like breach pickups instead of repulsor brace. You have attrition orbs, which I think is quite overrated on area denials now, but it's still pretty decent if you want to make some orbs off of like a large group of enemies. So like I say here, best element area denial with pretty much every relevant perk needed and an excellent origin trait to boot. Now in the kinetic slot, if you need an area denial, this one's easily the replacement for Lost Signal. It has air trigger, which is excellent on an area denial because you're killing a lot of ads with it. You have auto-loading holster, which is always welcome. You have Rhyme Stealer if you're planning on using Crystalline Corpse Plume. And the second column, you have Chain Reaction, and of course you have Aggregate Charge, which makes this objectively a better option for damage compared to something like a Festival Flight or a Lost Signal. Just auto-loading Aggregate is good to have on an area denial for tick damage. And of course you have Accelerated Assault as well, which is a free damage increase. Next, we have Gizmo Weft, and those are my recommendations. This one is basically just for movement, right? You have Air Trigger, you have Bipod. In theory, you can use this with a triple swap rotation and have a pretty decent swap DPS value coming out of this weapon using Envious Arsenal and Aggregate Charge. In terms of the round/mag recommendation for this weapon, I would say high velocity rounds is good for air trigger bipod just to increase your reload. And then you can run spike grenades or implosion rounds. Spike grenades and implosion rounds, they do basically the same amount of damage. In my testing, even with the hard launch stuff and like the reducing blast radius, increasing blast radius, spike grenades was slightly better than implosion rounds, I think even in the optimal case or something like that. They're very close to each other. So go with either of them. It makes the god roll for Gizmo Weft, at least for damage, a lot easier to maintain, I guess. So or to farm for, I should say. But yeah, that's my opinion on the rolls. But best movement and swap GL in this slot. Next, we have Psychopomp. Psychopomp is going to be your energy slot pick for damage, while VS Velocity Baton is for ad clear, Psychopomp is for damage. So you have auto-loading holster, you have aggregate charge, and then you have some ad clear perks. So you have Impromptu, you have Rolling Storm, Volt Shot, Gear Shift. So all pretty decent, but with heretical behavior for sustained damage, auto-loading aggregate is easily the best in slot energy GL for tick damage. We also have Festival Flight. The only reason why Festival Flight actually breaks S tier, because you could argue that it's kind of worse than Ouster Engine, just at a raw perk standpoint, is literally just Slice. It's literally just Slice. There's a lot of good artifact mods this season that really benefit from Slice, and Festival Flight For those that don't know, who don't use slice weapons a lot, maybe you can use slice to sever multiple targets. There is a limit to how many you can, but it's fairly reasonable. I'd say like once per class ability kind of fits the number of targets that you would want to slice at a time. And Festival Flight allows you to apply slice over a very large area very quickly. So there's plenty of artifact mods this season, I'll say, that benefit from defeating severed targets. Of course, you can also get unraveling orbs to proc on this thing as well, which will help you trigger some other effects. Next, we have the A tier. I would say Theodolite. It's not as important as Gizmo because a lot of the time you're using Ergo. But if you're using Lightsaber, for example, and you want a micro missile for movement, Theodolite is going to be your option. Unfortunately, it doesn't have bipod, so it's definitely worse than Gizmo if you just have to pick a micro missile in general. But it is the only energy slot micro missile, so I do have to give it some points for that, and that's why it's bolded. For damage, I would say it's not particularly noteworthy compared to maybe Gizmo, but it's not horrible either, I suppose, if you wanted like an arc swap GL in the energy slot. And then next we have New Pacific Epitaph. New Pacific Epitaph, I would say I wish it had Gravity Well in its modern version, but because the Red and the 9 version is not available anymore, you're going to have to settle for Restoration Ritual. I only bring this up because I do think a Redirection Wayframe is pretty decent. Redirection is a beloved perk, I think, by a lot of people on weapons like Succession and a couple other Ad Clear weapons, but I don't think as many people notice it on NPE. And so I think on NPE, it's worth maybe a look at trying it. Redirection, Chain Reaction. Of course, Chain Reaction explosions, I believe, count as weapon damage, and so should trigger Redirection's tick stacking. And then once you reach an actual like orange bar or yellow bar, your Wayframe will do a lot more damage, double the damage. It's not super noteworthy or anything, but I did think it was maybe the most standout Wayframe, and so I gave it a little bit of a bolding here in case that's something you're curious about. And then last but not least, I believe we have two more things to talk about. Salvager's Salvo, of course, has that trickle charge, gear shift / Reaper's Tithe accelerated assault gimmick, where you can sit behind a Stormscape barricade and just spam Salvager's Salvo. I don't think this is like meta defining or anything, but it is certainly unique. And if it's something you want to try, then I gave it a little bold because it's certainly more notable than basically anything above it that's not already bolded. And then finally, we have Lingering Dread, which I think is probably the best blinding GL in the game. Blinding GLs are not really something that comes up these days, not very often. But if you do want it for some sort of challenge or like you're pushing an ad or something like that in VOG, I would say this is the best one. It has auto-loading bipod, which is excellent for blinding uptime. It has basically everything you would want from a double fire when it comes to having bipod, except you can shoot the shots a lot more individually and intentionally. So I would say bipod is really, really great for that. And then of course it also has chill clip, which you can argue has like limited helpfulness, limited usefulness, because this weapon already has the overload intrinsic, which is what you would take chill clip for in the past before this intrinsic system was implemented and given to every single legendary weapon. Okay, so that's about it for BGLs. Let's move on to fusion rifles next. Now, fusion rifles, I have bolded these, but I will say I don't think there is a single fusion rifle in the game right now that's really worth farming for the general endgame use case, just because their damage profiles are so poor. But if you do want to farm for a fusion for whatever reason, the S tier fusions are all high impacts because of their damage profile. The Wizened Rebuke is in S tier rank 1 because it has Discord, whereas the others don't. You can use it for Discord. You can also use it for Overflow for damage. A lot of these high impact fusion rifles don't even have the best possible perk combos, but because high impacts are so dominant when it comes to damage profile, I kind of have to give them the S tier, and their damage perks are kind of like good enough. Glacioclasm is up here because it has basically the same role as Wizened Rebuke, except it has Withering Gaze. I do think high impact fusions are some of the best users of Withering Gaze because if you don't know, holding down the trigger to charge up your fusion counts as ADS time if you're ADS or Withering Gaze. It doesn't count as firing the weapon. And so you can basically just like wait a little bit, ADS with a high impact fusion and start charging, and you're kind of not wasting any time waiting for Withering Gaze, if that makes sense. Like the damage per shot is obviously going to be higher than something like, a shotgun, but you're kind of like using the time of that you would normally be waiting and doing nothing with Withering Gaze to charge the fusion instead. So it's kind of better efficiency for Withering Gaze, let's say. You have Loaded Question, which is essentially a better Wizened Rebuke when it comes to loader perks, but lacks Discord, and it has Problem Solver, which I would argue is better for boss damage. You have Accelerando if you want like a scatter signal replacement with like Slice or something like that. You have Accelerando. Precision Frame is the second best fusion frame by a fair margin. It's like, there's a big gap between high impact and precision and the rest of the archetypes are pretty close together. But I would say if you want like something like a scatter signal replacement, I would take Accelerando. And then Techian Force and Cartesian Coordinate are basically the only two other fusions that I've highlighted here, and that's because they have Collective Demolition. Collective Demolition is a new perk that allows you to get grenade energy on hits, and fusion rifles fire a lot of bolts, so you get a lot of grenade energy back from this. However, it is a fusion rifle, and if you're doing some sort of like fusion nade rotation where you shoot a fusion, throw a nade, shoot a fusion, throw a nade, the additional charge time, like the initial charge time, Fusions, they lose a lot of effectiveness if you shoot them like one shot at a time. Like you shoot them, you do something. You shoot them, you do something. Whereas instead of like mag dumping, because the time between fusion shots when you are mag dumping versus when you are spacing out your shots, you get punished a lot more with the charge time. So I don't think they're like the best weapon. They're definitely going to cut into your swap DPS a little bit if you choose to use them one shot at a time. But I thought they were kind of worth mentioning because they do in fact have collective demolition. Otherwise, I don't think there's any real reason to farm for these. And then finally, we have Monody 44. Which is a high impact fusion with Withering Gaze. The only reason why I mentioned this one is because I believe Glacioclasm is not currently obtainable. And so if you want a high impact fusion for Withering Gaze purposes, which I can see as a reasonable endgame use case, Monody 44 is currently available. Okay, next up we have Glaives. Glaives, a much shorter tier list here. I've actually reshuffled all the Glaives by quite a bit here. And for a variety of reasons. But let's take a look at our S tier first. Ecliptic Distaff and the Heron are both excellent glaives. You would take them for different reasons, right? You have the anti-barrier glaive with the adaptive frame. You have the Heron, which has the slightly better damage profile from the aggressive frame. It is also better for, ironically, breaking shields, despite the fact that it's not barrier. Disruption Break with the TechSec 2-piece set bonus. You can also run the 4-piece as well. It also benefits from this. But you can run Disruption Break, and then you can run like close to melee. When you break any sort of elemental shield or perhaps a barrier champion's shield using Disruption Break, the Disruption Break debuff applies to kinetic damage, and your glaive melees are kinetic damage. And so you can utilize this effect using like Disruption Break close to melee. And Nail Me Hammer, of course, is an origin trait that benefits from this interaction even more. So if you wanted like a more like a shield break style kind of glaive, you would run the Heron. I guess it's not anti-barrier, which is kind of unfortunate. And then I'd say the generic best glaive in the game right now is Ecliptic Distaff. You might be wondering why I put Repulsor Brace as the top option on basically every Void glaive available on this list that has access to the perk. And the reason for this is because of Suppressing Glaive. Suppressing Glaive allows you to suppress any enemy with your glaive projectile shots without any sort of cooldown, and that means free Repulsor Brace procs for literally anything that you shoot. And so I think that synergy is quite nice. Which is pretty helpful, and it doesn't rely on you getting like destabilizing rounds or anything like that, which is obviously quite annoying on a glaive because getting glaive projectile killing sprees is not exactly like the easiest thing to do in endgame content. So yeah, I would say Ecliptic Distaff, stat-wise, archetype-wise, because of this anti-barrier, as well as, its perk spread is pretty good. It also has Withering Gaze for some reason, so that's kind of interesting. You could have a little bit more utility in that regard. But yeah, that's why I would say Ecliptic Distaff, Heron, both slightly different use cases, for different folks. I would say Forthcoming Deviance is honestly just worse in every way compared to the top two glaives, as I mentioned here in the comments. It has a higher ammo gen stat, but for those of you that don't know, this ammo gen stat does not apply to your glaive melee kills, and you're not really getting rapid glaive projectile kills to make this difference really worth noting. You have Refusal of the Call, which has Slice. I think that's really the only reason why I put it here. Slice Chaos Reshaped is kind of a nice sustained combination. You have some decent origin traits available in the form of Heretical Behavior, as well as a Willing Vessel. But for the most part, Refusal of the Call, kind of a niche glaive. It's just because of Slice, and of course you have a lot of stuff in the artifact this season that benefits from like defeating severed targets. Rake Angle is just here because of Chill Clip. You have Overload, and you have Unstop covered by this glaive, so if you want to use a glaive in like a GM, it's not bad. And then Chill Clip is actually kind of like a damage perk, because if you hit 2 of these shots and you freeze something, obviously the frozen status is going to CC the target and also make it take shatter damage, which may not sound like a lot, but if you're using a glaive for defensive purposes, this can be kind of useful in order to chunk down a higher health target. Some of the other stuff here, we have Lubray's Ruin, which of course has a close to melee and Chaos Reshaped. If you're running a raw melee build and you don't care about Disruption Break, this is pretty nice. Just be aware that Soul Drinker doesn't work with the glaive melee hits. Judgment of Kelgrath, I only mention this because it has Demo Wellspring, which is a rare combination on a special weapon that has access to the tier 2 level of Demolitionist. For those of you that don't know, weapons like shotguns, glaives, fusions, snipers are special when it comes to Demolitionists and Pugilists. They have access to a second tier that gives you twice the energy of like a standard primary would if you get a Demolitionist kill. And so Judgment of Kelgrath is one of the best weapons for getting just a huge amount of ability energy on kill. Not the most relevant use case for a glaive, I would say, but in a lot of like speedrunning and optimized content, like let's say you're on like a transition or something like that, you really need to grapple for some reason, or you just swap subclasses and you really want to farm ability energy to provide some sort of benefit to your team or yourself, you can use this glaive to get that ability energy back very quickly. Okay, so that's about it for glaives. Let's move on next to the shotgun tier list. The shotgun tier list may be the most important one that we've looked at so far. Up in rank 1, we have threat level. I don't think I need to tell you guys about this one, but I'm sure you've seen people dump Cascade and All-Star threat level into bosses to great success using kinetic synthesis. That's obviously very good, but even ignoring that, this thing has pretty good perks regardless, and its frame is one of the best when it comes to just raw dump DPS. And so if you want to use this for roam, it's totally fine. 1-2 punch trench barrel, etc. And then of course you have the classic Cascade All-Star when it comes to damage. Found Verdict is kind of in the same boat. It's an aggressive, so it's a little bit worse of a frame. But when it comes to total damage, this thing is excellent, and it's not kinetic, so it kind of needs that. You have Aggregate and Trench Barrel, which are two of the strongest damage perks to ever put on a shotgun. You have Time Loss Magazine, which is excellent as well. Doubles the mag size of an aggressive, which is kind of a weak point of aggressive frames. You know, they have a pretty small mag size without Time Loss Magazine, so nice to have double the mag size. Pretty nice there. And then you have Perfect Paradox, which is, in my opinion, still the highest quality of life 1-2 punch shotgun. You can run really whatever you want in the first column and 1-2 punch. And with Cast No Shadows, you'll be able to reload this shotgun fairly quickly with any sort of melee damage strategy. We have Heritage, also in the S tier. This one is kind of unique because despite the fact that it's a pinpoint slug, which is the worst frame, the worst shotgun frame currently available, it does have a very, very unique perk combo in the form of Redirection Cascade, Redirection Aggregate, just very, very potent double damage perks. And so I can see this being used for some sort of dump option when it comes to legendary DPS, probably the highest, as I say here, 1 mag burst damage of any legendary special. So while it's not really relevant for most players, I thought it was notable, so I gave it a bold. And finally, fifth in the S tier, we have Basso Ostinato. This one's a rapid fire energy shotgun from Neo Muna. And I mean, it's been recommended before, it just wasn't enhanceable, and now it's enhanceable. So you have Grave Robber 1-2 punch with Nanotech Tracer missiles. You have a bunch of other perks as well, but really you're just looking at Grave 1-2 punch. This, honestly, it's only in the S tier because it's by a little bit the best 1-2 punch shotgun in the energy slot, right? You have a bunch of other Grave 1-2 punch rapids in the energy slot, but Nanotech Tracer missiles is the best origin trait of the bunch because it just gives you free damage. And so as a result, I'm going to recommend this one in the S tier just for being best in slot. But there are a lot of other shotguns in the energy slot that you could take a look at, like Ikelos SG, the Deicide, that are perfectly serviceable as well. You may be wondering why Unvoiced isn't bolded here, and that's because I think Heritage has kind of largely subsumed its purpose. I know they're in different slots, but I just don't see a reason why you would use Unvoiced for the most part. They also dropped Honing from this weapon, which I guess maybe I should include Honing at the bottom of the list here. Be like Elemental, Honing. And I'll put it here, and I'll put a strike through it because it's no longer obtainable in the latest version. There's a couple other weapons here where you'll notice like a perk that's been struck through, and I only really include perks that are struck through if I think they're relevant and were relevant at some point, and Bungie removed them from the weapon. Like a certain rocket sidearm you'll see later on in this tier list, but yeah, I just don't think Unvoiced is really going to find much of a use for endgame gameplay. Maybe for some like niche rotation or something like that, but I'm just not going to bold it for now. And then we have Felwinter's Lie. This one's a little interesting because it's the only aggressive frame that pairs Cascade Point with another usable damage perk in the second column. Even without Cascade Point, it's not like a horrible weapon or anything like that, but Cascade Point is really the selling point on this thing. And so it has potential for like Parasite swap rotations, I believe, because they're both solar, and aggressives do have the highest swap DPS of any shotgun archetype. So look for that when we do some analysis when it comes to aggressive frame swaps and potential damage rotations in the future when we do our damage rotation ranking. And then we have a Sudden Death. A Sudden Death, unfortunately, the old version is definitely a little bit better. It has Redirection. This one gets Reconstruction to replace that, and has Crossing Over, which is certainly worse than Gravity Well, I would say, on a shotgun. But for the most part, since Sudden Death is this is the only version you can get now, I think 1-2 punch / Discord plus Trench Barrel. 1-2 punch plus Trench Barrel is a unique role on specifically aggressives. So Found Verdict, I believe, does not have this role because it has 1-2 punch in the second column. So Sudden Death's a little unique in that regard. And then finally, we have Imperial Decree. Imperial Decree is, of course, the highest ranking kinetic slot aggressive frame here. And it just has auto-loading, Trench Barrel, and Surrounded, which makes it pretty useful. It does have the 15% bonus to non-boss targets, which is very useful to have on a special weapon for roam content. And so, yeah, I think if you want a shotgun that's just good at nuking mini-bosses in the kinetic slot specifically, whether you're in a raid or a dungeon, I think Imperial Decree is pretty high quality of life for that specific use case. And then finally, we have a couple more shotguns here. We have Pure Recollection. You may be wondering what this is doing here, given that its perks are not that great. This is mostly just for dying quickly. If you ever need to wipe quickly, or for speedruns specifically, dying quickly is very, very useful. Ricochet rounds on a heavy burst will just one-shot you if you have low enough health. And so, yeah, Pure Recollection, very useful for that. There's a lot of activities where you need to die quickly. Maybe not most players will find this useful, but you know, it's a nice tool to have in your back pocket. You kind of just need ricochet rounds. And it also has Withering Gaze, which is not the worst on a shotgun, maybe not the best archetype given the range limitation, but certainly something that I've used it for in the past. And then finally, we have Arcane Embrace. Arcane Embrace, it is the best heavy burst shotgun, the best sustained damage shotgun in the game if you ignore kinetic synthesis, I suppose, with 4 times the charm and aggregate charge. Unfortunately, this is kind of left in the dust by some of the more modern shotguns of the day, like Found Verdict and Threat Level, but Arcane Embrace still might find some use because maybe it's technically a little bit better than Pure Recollection when it comes to proccing Cascade, as heavy burst shotguns, if you were not aware, proc Cascade in one shot. Both bursts count towards the 2 shotgun hit requirement for Cascade Point, which is obviously very useful for a weapon like Threat Level, because you want to be spending as much time as you can on Threat Level rather than spending it on your other weapons. And so that can be pretty useful. And that's pretty much it for shotguns. And let's go ahead and move on to snipers next. Snipers, we have some interesting snipers to look at. First up, we have Conspiracy Honed. I don't think I need to explain this one. Best damage sniper in the game, insanely power-crept archetype. That's 50% more damage per shot compared to the equivalent rapid fire RPM. We have Praetor's Revenge, which is an extremely versatile sniper. Excellent origin trait, just great all around. Yeah, just excellent stuff. I will say something is a little bit underrated, I would say, because aggressive frames and rapids actually have very similar sustained DPS, and with accelerated assault, this might surprise you. Something actually does more DPS, higher DPS, than Praetor's Revenge. Now, if you run Kinetic Tremors on Praetor's Revenge, you run double damage perks, it will do slightly higher DPS than something. But if you're running 4 times a charm and you're running standard perks, something with triple tap honing and accelerated assault will out DPS Praetor's Revenge with 4 times a charm, honing, and time loss magazine. Assuming that you are just shooting both of them and picking up kinetic synthesis bricks, of course. And then the fourth sniper in the S tier is the Helmsman. The Helmsman is a new sniper, a new frame, high impact frame. And it has some okay perks. The perks are pretty decent. You have accelerated assault, which has been fixed to work on it now. And this weapon, it's not very great for boss DPS, but it's excellent when it comes to total damage against red bars, orange bars, yellow bars during roam content. So if you have like a champ you need to kill, this thing basically is a legendary NLB, which I think is very useful, probably more useful for more casual endgame players compared to some of the more optimized, environments. So I think the Helmsman is great, honestly, in all sorts of environments. So pretty good there. You have Omniscient Eye, which has 4 times the charm and honing. The reason why I mentioned this one specifically is it's solar compared to Rapid Growth's arc, even though aggregate charge I would say is on average probably better than honing. But Omniscient Eye also has access to incendiary sniper rounds, which normally you really kind of just think of Still Hunt with that artifact mod, but Omniscient Eye also benefits from it. We have Rapid Growth with 4 times the charm aggregate charge, good pairing with Anarchy. And then we have Adored versus Rapid Growth, which is kind of the same situation as something versus Praetor's Revenge in the kinetic slot. One of them has accelerated assault, but a slightly worse frame. But with accelerated assault, it does actually pull ahead slightly of Rapid Growth, and it is an adaptive frame if you care about anti-barrier as well. We have Father's Sins, which is a shoot to loot withering gaze, rapid fire sniper. I don't think I really need to tell you much more. I also has Psycho Hack, which is excellent for if you want to exhaust the boss as well as debuff it. And then the other perks are not too bad either. It has shoot to loot for a perk swap as well. So this is basically a pure utility sniper, but I think it is the best withering gaze sniper overall. We have Apostate, which is the only energy slot shoot to loot explosive payload sniper that's a rapid, which is kind of useful because this basically didn't exist. I mean, you had Luna Regolith, which was a lot worse, and Apostate is just a little bit better, and so I put it in the A tier. We have Succession, which has Discord redirection. I honestly don't think you're really using this thing for damage these days, so this is more of like an ad clear kind of combo. And a lot of people have seen some success with Succession being used in this way. Obviously, the pacing is a little slow, but for longer range targets, redirection is excellent for storing up a double damage buff against some of your beefier targets that you might be encountering out in the wild. And then you have Last Foray. I do think Last Foray is very underrated. It has a Discord incandescent. I think this is the best energy slot Discord sniper if you're going to use that. And snipers are excellent with Veteran's Wisdom. Any precision kill allows you to release a kinetic kind of exhausting shockwave, which is really cool. And then it also has access to incendiary sniper rounds, which is not something you can say about Succession. So even though it is missing redirection, which is I guess something sort of major, this is kind of an interesting perk combo to have. Not that I recommend Discord snipers and endgame content on the whole, but if you're going to use one, this is probably the best energy slot one. And then finally, the last two snipers to talk about here is going to be Volta Bracket. This is the only shoot to loot explosive payload sniper in the kinetic slot, which is useful for some optimized content where you want to be able to shoot bricks and not lose your special ammo by swapping to something like a primary, like a Vulpecula. And then finally, we have Locus Locutus, which has seen some use recently in the Lightblade Ultimate Conquest. This is basically just an anti-barrier sniper with under over. It is the correct frame, the adaptive frame. The rest here doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess overflow is kind of nice, but under over just for barrier stun is kind of notable. And so I've given it a bolding here. And that's pretty much it for snipers. Let's go ahead and move on to rocket sidearms. Rocket sidearms we got some good ones. Lotus Eater, I don't think I need to tell you, is excellent. It has repulsor brace, destabilizing rounds, air trigger destabilizing rounds, has surrounded, has withering gaze. The only shame here is that Bungie, for some unknowable reason, decided to remove shoot to loot from Lotus Eater, which was a terrible decision from them. I don't know why they did that. Shoot to loot is absolutely excellent on rocket sidearms for a lot of endgame content, for a lot of optimized content especially. So very, very sad that they got rid of shoot to loot, and they didn't bring it back. They didn't put it on high albedo either, so that if you are missing out on a shoot to loot rocket sidearm, you actually got permanently FOMO'd out of it. So kind of sucks, but it is what it is. It is still probably S tier even without shoot to loot, but kind of sucks. High Albedo is a new addition to the rocket sidearm field. I think it is the best kinetic rocket sidearm by far. It has Bewildering Burst and Ancillary Ordnance, 2 perks which I think are very, very good on specifically a rocket sidearm frame, because Bewildering Burst is a perk that scales in its usefulness based on how many kills you can get very quickly in endgame content and how often you reload. And with rocket sidearms, you're doing a lot of both. And so I think Bewildering Burst is pretty good. It also has Lead from Gold and Stopping Power on an already unstoppable weapon, so it will stagger enemies very quickly, even in content where they don't take a lot of damage. And then you have Kinetic Tremors and All-Star, which are kind of worth mentioning, I suppose, but I do think the top perks here are the best. Winterized Gear, it's a little unfortunate. It's the only bad thing really about this rocket sidearm. It is high ammo gen stat. Everything else is looking great. And of course, it also has the kinetic 15% boost to non-boss targets, which made me put it this high. You know, it's a free, essentially 15% damage perk compared to the other rocket sidearms here. The only real bad thing about this is, again, Winterized Gear, which is essentially a Nothing Burger origin trait. You have Return Memory with Heal Clip Redirection and Tenacity, just an excellent combo overall. Not really much to comment on this year. If you want to sustain healing rocket sidearm and not specifically avoid one, I would say Return Memory is excellent and Redirection is great on a rocket sidearm as well. Indebted Kindness has recently been reintroduced with Air Trigger and Chain Reaction and Attrition Orbs, of course with the classic Volt Shot as well. Air Trigger to increase your ammo gen is excellent, as we all know. And then, of course, Volt Shot is great on a rocket sidearm. And you also have Chain Reaction and Attrition Orbs. Attrition Orbs, I believe, takes a couple shots to activate. But because your hits, it's like a splash weapon, because your hits on multiple enemies will count for Attrition Orbs, you will get orbs actually fairly quickly with this weapon. And I'll do some testing on Attrition Orbs and maybe make like some sort of tweet or something later on to test and measure like Multi-Mog versus Skate Log and Indebted Kindness and all that stuff. But, you know, until then, I would say Indebted Kindness, yeah, pretty good overall. If you're willing to, you know, forego Heal Clip and Repulsor Brace in whatever content that you're doing. And then finally, the last two rocket items that I think are worth mentioning. Aberrant Action is just a strict downgrade from Return Memory. So you have Tenacious Mastery with Chill Clip, which allows you to stun 2 different champ types. And then you have the Call, which has Slice. I mean, it has a really, really poor ammo gen stat for whatever reason, but Slice is very useful. And it is also a Dealer's Choice kit fill option. And so if you're running a Dealer's Choice triple loadout and you want a special weapon in the kinetic slot, the Call is pretty good for that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess Unfall has an overload intrinsic because it has the Together Forever frame, which is, I guess, kind of unique if you want specifically an overload intrinsic rocket sidearm. But of course, you could also just use Tenacia and then cover Unstop and overload in the same rocket sidearm, albeit being in another slot. Okay, so that is about it for rocket sidearms. We're down to our last two tier lists. We have Traces, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff. So Traces in the S tier, I have Chronophage and Unsworn as usual. Chronophage has Repulsor, Destabilizing, Radiolaria Transposer, and Shoot Salute. Basically, the perfect trace. The only bad thing about this trace is that the ammo gen stat is a little low compared to the other traces on this list, but it's just excellent. It's just excellent ad clear. Destabilizing rounds allows you to apply an instant debuff on anything you shoot for harsh refraction purposes. You can also drop it and get Volatile Flow destab. You can run Desperate Measures instead, and of course you have Shoot Salute for utility as well. You have Unsworn, which is Subjugation, Terror, Chaos Reshape, Shoot Salute, Hashlink, Detonator Beam, all great perks, and Strand Traces are actually quite favored with the Harsh Refraction artifact, so Unsworn pretty good as well. Cariunios is also another Shoot Salute energy trace with some decent perks in the second column, although honestly I do like Volt Shot a little bit more than Jolting Feedback, especially for harsh refraction purposes where you want to instantly apply Jolt to a target instead of having to hold down your trigger and just wait for that target to become jolted before you get the harsh refraction benefit. So Cariunios, certainly not bad. Chain Reaction, an interesting perk to have on a trace, but definitely a little step down, especially due to Element compared to Unsworn and Chronophage. Hollow Denial is an interesting pick here. It has very, very high ammo gen stat, and it has access to Repulsor Brace, and you can get destabilizing rounds from the artifact. Extrovert is also a great origin trait for sustain. Obviously less splash access compared to Radiolaria Transposer, but Extrovert is still a very, very good origin trait. And then in the first column, you have Lead from Gold, you have Adaptive Munitions. I think if you want to use a trace, for example, for anti-barrier in like a GM and you're on a Void build, or I should say Conquest, this is a Void trace. You can get destab from the artifact. You have Repulsor Brace, you have Adaptive Munitions, which makes this thing shred through barrier champions even when you're really, really under light. So it's pretty good. I would say Chronophage is generally the go-to pick, especially if you don't need to run artifact support. But Hollow Denial is certainly good, especially with that ammo gen stat. You have Retrace Path, which is, classic solar. Shoot Salute, Incandescent has Adaptive Disruption Break for, anti-barrier. If you're planning on swapping to a kinetic weapon like the Heavy Sniper, which is kinetic, your Disruption Break, Shield Break here on a barrier champion will allow you to absolutely nuke down that champion due to Disruption Break's debuff effect. You have Acacia's Dejection, which is the best, I think, Burning Ambition primary adjacent weapon. So if you're running some sort of Hellion build, or you're running some sort of Ignition Completion build, I do think Burning Ambition Incandescent or Burning Ambition Chaos Reshaped or something like that, this is easily the best solar primary adjacent Burning Ambition weapon, just because of its raw ammo count and the fact that it's a special weapon with a better damage profile than almost all primaries, especially the ones that get Burning Ambition. And then finally, we have Incisor. Unfortunately, I'm not actually recommending this because it no longer gets Slice, from what I know, and or it's no longer available. It's one of those things. So Incisor, yeah, it's like the only Slice trace in the game, and Slice being on a trace is really nice, honestly. Being able to apply Slice with a very, very precise kind of hit scan long range weapon is really, really helpful, especially a weapon that doesn't waste a lot of ammo like a trace rifle. So Incisor, that's the only reason why I bolded it, but it's not very good otherwise. All right, that's it for traces. Let's quickly cover this other tier list here, and then I'll set you guys free. Okay, so rocket pulses, we have 3 of them. I think it's very, very straightforward. The picks here, rocket pulses are no longer really relevant with mag refill perks, number 1, and boss damage perks, number 2, which completely changes the perk recommendations on these rocket pulses, and you'll see that here. So number 1 here, you can see Valentive D. In my opinion, is the best rocket pulse in the game right now because it has the highest base ammo stat at 25, which is significantly higher than like the 9 that Mint Retrograde gets, and it also has air trigger, which is preferable over field prep. The second column is pretty decent as well. You have Incandescent, which is not bad, Desperate Measures, which is good for roam, and then Burning Ambition if for whatever reason you want Burning Ambition. I didn't really find any other perks in this column particularly noteworthy. I don't think Sword Logic is very good. And then Hawkeye Breach Armaments, I guess, is an okay origin trait, but for the most part, you're taking it for the air trigger, high ammo gen, and then decent roam perk package. I honestly might think Desperate Measures is higher than Incandescent here, but it's kind of whatever. But yeah, Valentive is the best energy rocket pulse, easily better than Sciaturna 4, and probably the best rocket pulse in the game right now when it comes to just ad clear, which is what rocket pulses excel at. You have Mint Retrograde, which has field prep, which is kind of like the grounded equivalent of air trigger. You have Beacon Rounds and Hatchling. Beacon Rounds, famous perk on this gun. And then the second column here, you have Master of Arms, Chain Reaction. And if you don't have a Slice Mint Retrograde, unfortunately, no longer available. But I do think it was the 3rd best perk to run on Mint Retrograde. And of course, it has Accelerated Assault. A lot of the time, you might be running Vanguard Determination now that this is kind of like an ad clear weapon, but you will certainly benefit from Accelerated Assault from time to time on this weapon as well, especially if you're dealing with a chunkier target like a mini boss of some sort. And then we have Sciaturna 4, which honestly, in my opinion, is mostly irrelevant. The perks on this weapon were already kind of weak and needed to be kind of coddled and accounted for when it comes to boss damage. And now that it's not a boss damage weapon, I just don't really think this is ever worth running over Valentive unless you're specifically looking to, like, you know, scav match or surge match or something. I really don't think there's any reason to run Sciaturna 4 in the modern era, so I do think Valentive is just strictly better. And then finally, we have Uncivil Discourse, which I guess I've tiered here at a B. I wasn't really sure how to apply tiers. Someone's asking me to put tiers on these weapons. Not really sure how to apply tiers here, but Uncivil Discourse I think is largely kind of useless these days. It's not really useful for Lucky Pants anymore. I mean, I will test it with Lucky Pants because it is a comparison to last season. But yeah, I don't think it's really worth it with Lucky Pants. And then obviously it has decent crit minor DPS, but you know, you have rocket pulses here in literally the same tab, which I would much rather run a Valentive D than an Uncivil Discourse in the vast majority of use cases when it comes to ad clear. And so yeah, that's pretty much it for the other tab. I hope you guys have enjoyed my little discussion of special weapons here. It's been a blast. I had a lot more fun talking about specials than I did about primaries. And in 2 days, we'll be talking about the power weapons. If you're curious, the power weapon tier lists are basically done for now, outside of the sword tier list, which I'll be finishing today. And so in 2 days, we'll get that done, maybe even 1 day, if we're lucky. And after that, I'll be doing some exotic weapon testing. You know, 1K with Catalyst, Lament with Catalyst, lots of stuff people have been asking me to test, which will take a while. But after that, we'll get the exotic weapon tier list done, and then the shopping list will be done. And then we'll probably move on to damage testing if I'm not bogged down by anything else by then. So I'll see you guys around, and thank you for watching.